Welcome back, everyone, to the latest installment of Battle of the Ballads with Gregory and Joseph Dilcox, the brothers Dilcox, if you will. It's just sticking, guys. I know it's just sticking. I want to thank everybody who took the time to watch these, follow our videos. We have some folks who are watching week to week, which is great. The social media chatter, just telling us your thoughts, your picks. Some of them made me think, actually, and I really appreciate the research people are doing and the time you're taking. This week, Dan Broccoli gave us Heart Shaped Box as Song of the Year with Creep by Radiohead and Linger by the Cranberries as a runner-up. Paul Brenner gave us Heart Shaped Box, and then he said Pearl Jam Daughter was a close second. Good choices there. Kelly Susie gave us Fade Into You by Mazzy Star, which I will definitely be talking about in this session. And also Bjork's There's More to Life Than This, which she said gets her moving. Charlene Ann, she said if we're picking the worst of 93, it's got to be Meatloaf and the Cranberries. And on behalf of Dolores and Bob with Bitch Tits from Fight Club, shame on you, Charlene. Shame on you.
Out of here.
Yeah,
They will both end up on my list.
Yeah, I'm gonna pop out for a second because I forgot one of the props for this week.
And Jen Benz gave us. She said there are a lot of treasure troves of jams. She gives Hey Jealousy, Gin Blossoms, Rump Shaker, Rex and Effects, Nothing But a G Thing, Dr. Dre. I'm Gonna Be, The Proclaimers, Two Princes by the Spin Doctors, What's Up, Four Non Blondes, and Sweat by Inner Circle, Mr. Wendell, Arrested Development. And she actually touched my heart with this one, most underrated song of the year, Come Undone by Duran Duran. I love that track. TC Pellet, Too Many to List. And then he gave me pretty much, I think he's spying on my playlist. Janet Jackson, That's the Way Love Goes. Love Is, Vanessa Williams, Brian McKnight, and I Die Without You. Jeremiah Perry Hill gave us The Breeders' Cannonball and then brought up Souls of Mischief, 93 Till Infinity, which Jermaine Toppin also gave us. Definitely a hot track that I think a lot of people forgot about for that year. Austin Pettigrew came in with Tag Team. Boom, there it is. And they'll forever be known as the Sprinkles guys now, which is fine with me. Counting Crows, the Omaha, Mr. Jones off the August and Everything After album. Crash Test Dummies. Joe Diffie propped me up beside the jukebox, which I have not heard probably in a lot of years. I went back and gave that a re-listen. So thanks, Austin, for that reminder. And Ace of Base, The Sign. Nicole gave us Radiohead Creep, and she said we don't know what she was like that year in music. So I'm curious what creep means for that, but I'm going to let that stay a mystery. My guy Dan Robillard gave us All Apologies by Nirvana, Radiohead Creep, Runaway Train, Soul Asylum, which there is an awful cover out of that song that's played at every Speedway gas station here. Do you guys have it out by you?
Of the Soul Asylum?
Yeah.
Why would you want to cover a song that already sounds like someone trying to be Tom Petty? Like, what a dumb move.
Not just that, but it's like kids singing this song, and I'm like, oh, is this for like the milk carton kids, like missing kids? And no, I don't know what the hell it is, but it's on the little cameras at Speedway, and it drives me nuts. Lisa Schrader gave us Cannonball by the Breeders, Fade Into You, Mazzy Star, Heart Shaped Box, Nirvana. We're noticing a theme with some of these songs. Cherub Rock's Bashing Pumpkins, and Halcyon and On by Orbital, which I totally forgot about that track. Sherry Nutter Timothy, she gave us All That She Wants, Ace of Base, Crazy, and Crying by Aerosmith. I think that was the Get a Grip album, I think?
Yeah.
Far Behind by Candlebox, and by Crash Test Dummies. The Candlebox thing pisses me off. I was actually supposed to see them in concert last year, which I've been waiting a lifetime to do, and then, COVID. I guess we can just end our sense with that.
It's weird. I think the shows that were most affected for me with COVID, other than the Kesha Cruise, which has been pushed back, but will still happen. But for shows I had tickets in Pittsburgh, like Against Me, and I was super bummed about that. I've seen Against Me a handful of times, but it's such a good show every time. And I just recently read and shared in the Cool Points newsletter an article where Laura Jane Grace talks about how hard it is not touring. So it's like, I know Against Me is going to be playing Colorado, and I know it's not a hard sell to get Joe to go with me.
Not at all.
Like that one was a tough one. And also John Cusack was doing a Q&A about Say Anything, and I had tickets to that in Pittsburgh. So like that's two shows I just ended up having to get refunds. And I'm like, man, I don't like to get refunds for shows that I know are going to get rescheduled. But I did. I mean, I still have tickets to an Interpol concert in Pittsburgh from like 7 years ago that got rescheduled because it still hasn't been rescheduled. So,
well, at our area, they're rescheduling, but it's for Tuesdays and stuff like that. So it's like, it's just not going to happen for me. But I mean, I had tickets to Rage and Public Enemy, I had tickets to Candlebox, and I had tickets to Airborne Toxic event. And luckily, Airborne we're still seeing in October, but missing out on the Rage and the Candlebox just sucks.
That Rage Public Enemy show, I think, was like sold out instantly in Pittsburgh, so it wasn't one I was too bummed about because I didn't get tickets anyway. So.
On a bright note, Carly started to announce some tour dates for you today. I noticed that and got a smile. So
I missed that news. I'm not gonna lie. Other than this project, I haven't been on the internet. I've been reading comics on Marvel Unlimited. So
Nice.
I'm Tuesdays is a news break for me because Wednesday I start ramping up reading news. So
I can roll with that. Wow, we have a lot of tracks to get through from folks. Just noticing. Eric Prince gave us Nirvana, Heart Shaped Box, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Soul to Squeeze, and Porno for Pyro Pets. And I totally forgot that song came out that year. I love that track. Ellen, our avid dual listener to the podcast and this channel. Creep Radiohead, Power of Love, Celine Dion. Dreams and Linger by the Cranberries. Fields of Gold by Sting. Ain't Going Down, the Sun Comes Up, Garth Brooks. Please Forgive Me, Ryan Adams. Two Princess Spin Doctors. I Don't Want to Fight, Tina Turner. Independence Day, Martina McBride. The theme from Schindler's List, which is why I think I had to read this twice. My guy, John Williams. The theme from Jurassic Park. More Tears for Her. And This Is Halloween from The Nightmare Before Christmas by Danny Elfman. Ellen is a big musical fan and loves the soundtracks from these movies, so I just love seeing her put that in there. My guy, Jeff Warden, gave us Whitney's I'll Always Love You. Ace of Base, The Sign. Nothing But a G Thing. And Amazing Cry, Eat the Rich and Crying from Aerosmith. But he gave it to Whitney, I Will Always Love You right there, which I think a lot of people kind of go that route. Jermaine Toppin, he also gave us Soul's Mistress 93, Till Infinity. Ice Cube, Check Yourself. Whitney, I'll Always Love You. H-Town, Knockin' the Boots, which I listened to that like 10 times last week. And Dre's Nothing But a G Thing. JJ Bryce came in with I Do Anything for Love, but I Won't Do That. He said he's a weird guy, but that song was perfect. And I think that sums that up pretty well.
I mean, I said that we should just vote on that as Song of the Year, right, on Facebook between the three of us, so we didn't have to try and narrow it down. So
I think Charlene would be in agreement too. Tony De Romanis will actually be joining us next week to talk 1994 and a really awesome cause he has going on regarding mental health. He gave us Jodeci Cry For You, Aaron Hall, I Miss You, Tevin Campbell, Can We Talk, and practically the entire album Siamese Dream by Smashing Pumpkins, but he said we'll go with Disarm. Janet Jackson, If and Again, and Duran Duran, he came with Come Undone, Ordinary World, and also said, check out Coverdale Page, Shake My Tree, just as a musical recommendation. Megan Otis, If I Had No Loot, Tony, 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 and nobody could deny Trace Tony's. Trace Tony's. And rounding this out, our last two, Dawn Jones, she said she was actually surprised she remembered music from 93 because she was in grad school. She went with Rhythm of the Dancer and ultimately Everything Sung by Tony Braxton. And to be honest, that album by Tony Braxton was a masterpiece. So I'm right there with you. And Erin Kidd rounding us out. She gave us Whitney, I'll Always Love You. And Boyz II Men, Mariah Carey, Aladdin soundtrack. And A Whole New World. She also mentioned Jeremy. She said she thinks out of all those tracks, it has to be I'll Always Love You by Whitney. So I'm seeing a trend from our fellow listeners here. And I'm wondering where that's going to go as far as we start talking about this sort of stuff. And Greg, I know you have some awesome info to kick us off in terms of some masterpieces that came out that year. You want to kick us off with some?
Yeah. So as we got into the 90s, I've been tracking like notable debut artists, and there was a lot of them. And I'll mention Dave Matthews Band first, although as Joe pointed out at dinner, that album was released as the Dave Matthews Band, and it's the only one. So Joe and I are not Dave Matthews fans, but this is a Dave Matthews house because Amanda's the boss. So that was the debut album from then. 311, not an album I really liked. I think the next one's Where It Kicks Off, which I think has been pretty regular for these debut albums. Is the first ones are okay, but I think the fact that 3 or 4 different Smashing Pumpkins songs off Siamese Dreams were listed, but we had to narrow down just one that we think was notable off the first album, Gish. So I think that's just how debut albums were at this time. I think they get better now, but Ace of Base, and that one's always a tough one because Ulf Ekberg has a neo-Nazi past, of course. He's come out and said that's not him anymore. but it's also something that somehow is super buried and you have to like search for it and it's not discussed. So I feel wrong mentioning Ace of Base without discussing that. I know he was a late addition to the band and they changed the name when he joined. So I don't know how much writing he had on those first songs, but they had the debut album and then they had a second album that was like an American release on top of the debut album. So they actually had 2 albums that year. Radiohead's debut album, Creep, was mentioned a lot with good reason. Shania Twain, her next album's considerably better than this one as well, but
this one's not very good, actually.
Yeah, I think this is more country, and then she really branches in that country pop with that next one and becomes a household name for the rest of her life after that.
Was the next one they had From This Moment on it, or is that even later?
I think the next one has From This Moment. Jamiroquai, Jamiroquai, they had like one big hit, but always really solid. The Roots, this was their debut album. I think they took a couple albums to hit their stride too, and really, unfortunately, didn't become household names until they were Jimmy's band every night. But
Right.
Bjork was mentioned, and I just love that this first album from her was called Debut. It's just like, it's smart and it's very Bjork. Counting Crows, the first Wu-Tang album, we'd had Wu-Tang adjacent stuff come out already, since that is a giant collective, but this is the first actual Wu-Tang album. The first Shaq album, which oddly enough, you wouldn't think it, but he wrote, I think, everything, or at least co-wrote every song but one on that album. I mean, it's not a good album. They're not good songs, but Good on him. He, at that point, could have afforded the best ghostwriters. He could have had Jay-Z, much like Dr. Dre did with Chronic 2000, but he didn't. He wrote the album.
He also wrote a lot of the What's Up, Doc, Can We Rock with the Fushnikins track, too, that he was featured on.
Yeah, so, I mean, good for Shaq. I mean...
Not good for the listener.
Yeah, not good for the listener, but, I mean, he wanted to do it, and he did it. Hilarious that the unreleased Kobe album was considerably better than anything Shaq ever did, but...
Can't Stop the Rain.
Good on Kobe for knowing it also wasn't the best rap album, so... and then the most important debut album of the year was the self-titled Joey Lawrence.
Holy shit.
Which I paid a solid $3 for. So
man's coming out with a Joey Lawrence fire.
Which there's a Joey Lawrence Wikipedia article, but there's not a Wikipedia article for this album. And I think it's the only album released in 93 that Wikipedia lists that doesn't have an article about the album specifically. And some of them go pretty in depth, but it's not a good album, even though I do own it. It's not something I will ever listen to. I've listened to it one time and that's all I'll ever need to listen to. But yeah, those were the notable debuts. I think with Radiohead, Shania Twain, you have some powerhouses there. And I think Radiohead, of the debut albums we've encountered in the 90s so far, that's the best first album of those. So it's setting up for even more fun as we go through these 90s and 2000s.
So one I want to throw in that might be a little controversial because it's listed under both years is the debut Collective Soul album. Because I think what ends up happening is it was recorded in their basement, not in a studio. And then I think it was re-released in 94 as well. So you'll find the first Collective Soul under both 93 and 94. And so that actually does show up on my short list.
I took Collective Soul as 93 because that's when Shine was a single. So I took them as 93.
And so the demo was also released, I believe, in that year. And then it was re-recorded, re-released in 94.
Because they were trying to put their stuff out independently, right? And then they got picked up by the label, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's why the first one was recorded in their one of their basements. And
I was questioning myself on that because I was looking at the track listing for that first one. I'm like, this isn't that album I had. Yeah, spot on.
And Joe was right about the controversial thing. It's one of those things I wasn't listing debut albums in the 80s when that first Gin Blossoms came out, but it's similar to like the demo before they released. It's tough, and I tend to go with the polished demo if that's their sound going forward. Because some people do a demo and then they do that polished demo and then they're like, oh crap, this isn't us, and go back to it. But
you know what's interesting too?
That case for me.
That was also an era where bands tried stuff live that they didn't put on studio albums or even release as singles. And so there's recordings of that were then released, for unplugged stuff or whatever, that weren't actual like singles and stuff. It was a very interesting era where it's like, let's try it, let's see what sticks. I remember like we have WBER here, they're like an alternative station, but they would have like these bootleg cuts from concerts, and all of a sudden like it's just played everywhere, and it was interesting.
Well, we really get in the mid 2000s, that becomes a thing too with the file sharing, especially since you were file sharing by songs. I know Bread Eye specifically, after the success of Lifted, he, or I guess they, whatever iteration you want to use with the band, toured for forever. And there were so many unreleased tracks and then tracks that came out of the next album that were completely different than the live stuff and the demo stuff. And that hindered that album for me. I know there became a lot of Bright Eyes fans with Wide Awake, and we'll get into that once we get to, I think, 2006. But I really don't like that album because there's so many songs I'd loved in the raw version and I did not like on that studio. So, but I know like First Day of My Life has become like a wedding staple for a certain type of people, and I think less of that song simply because I didn't care for that album as much. Not even, he released 2 albums on that same day and I preferred the others. So.
No, I definitely feel
so
you there.
I prefer that album, of course, but there are a couple of songs that I like, the raw pre-recorded ones.
Now, as we do 93, admittedly, Joseph and I have not decided on our final pick. So we're going to do the fun thing of starting with Joseph and putting him on the hot spot to get things going. But I will also be candid. Normally, I cut down my list prior to these. I couldn't. I'm at about 60 songs right now for my short list. So I'm going to be deleting the songs that all my followers said, and then the songs that you guys say as we go, because I could keep you here for days with what I have. And so I may give a nod, a comment. It's simply because I acknowledge that, but I'm getting rid of it so I don't repeat myself. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Awesome. And we're each picking one song. And Joseph and I have not picked our song yet. So we are on the spot as we go. And Greg knew his song from the beginning because he's a G like that. So, all right, Joe.
I knew my song before I did the short list. So,
and I knew I loved you before I met you. So there's a lot here. Joe, what do you got for us?
That's not
yet. You are correct.
No, so this was an incredibly difficult year. I mean, granted, I just did it today. But I didn't end up cutting down too much because my first go at it wasn't 40, like at 92. It's only 24, so I'm just going to leave it as it is. But what I think is interesting about this year is normally when I go through and I do my short list, one song pops out to me and I already know what song I've got for that year before I even start cutting it down to my normal 10 or 20 now that we're doing one song a year. But right now, as I went through it, I have 6 songs starred that would all win in other years that it will be painful to have to actually pick one, but I'll go through the other 18 of them first. So I have All I Want to Do, Sheryl Crow. I actually really like Sheryl Crow. All That She Wants, Ace of Base is my favorite off that album. I know The Sign, I think, was more popular, but I like All That She Wants. Ants Marching, Dave Matthews Band. That's one of the few songs I recognize by name, and it's a good track. Cannonball, The Breeders. Crying, Aerosmith. That song just gets stuck in my head. Daughter, Pearl Jam. That's my choice off that album. Smashing Pumpkins, I'm going to go with Disarm. That's my favorite off of that one. Snoop, Gin and Juice. Nirvana. Oh, crap. That's one of my starred ones. Oh, well. I have actually Heart-Shaped Box and Rape Me. I can't decide between the two of them. They're both great. And specifically, I loved that year at the MTV Video Music Awards, Nirvana was playing. And basically MTV told them they had to play what was it, Smells Like Teen Spirit. And they started with the first 8 bars of Rape Me because that's the one they actually wanted to play. And so MTV was scrambling to like cut them off before they kept going, and then they went into Smells Like Teen Spirit. So just trolling MTV, which is hilarious. Linger by the Cranberries, wonderful song. Mary Jane's Last Dance, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. I love that song. Mr. Jones is my choice off that Counting Crows album. Shine, Collective Soul, I've already talked about them. I had a chance to see them live, and it was an amazing show.
I stopped you right there.
Yeah.
So my friends and I went to an Our Lady Peace Tonic Collective Soul show like 3 or 4 years ago in a parking lot. And we were joking about seeing Collective Soul. We're like, oh, we get to see Collective Soul. And we walked away with that being one of the best performances I've ever seen in my entire fucking life.
They are really good. They put on a great live show.
That frontman is one of the best front performers I've ever seen in any concert.
We saw them in Montreal, and it was just them. They weren't touring with anyone else. And so they were having just local bands open for them at each of their shows. And the only thing I remember about the opening band was they were decent enough. It was fine. But because we were in Montreal, they spoke French in between the songs. The songs were recorded in English, or they performed in English. But they must have been really funny. I didn't understand a lick of what they said, but they had the crowd in stitches, like in between every one of their songs. So it was just a good atmosphere for that show. But moving on, we got Shoop, Salt and Pepper. Sober by Tool. Whoop, there it is, Tag Team. What is Love, Hadaway. Insane in the Brain, Cypress Hill. And then Creep, Radiohead. So those are all of my not starred ones, including Heart Shaped Box. So my starred ones, the ones that were in contention, we got River of Dreams, Billy Joel. That is my all-time favorite Billy Joel song. I absolutely love it. Come to My Window. Not sure it's my all-time favorite Melissa Etheridge, but it's up there. It might be. It's in contention for that. Crash Test Dummies. I love that song. It was a bar staple for Gregory and I for as long as I can remember.
Well, to be fair, it was a bar staple, and then also a bar staple we would try because one of the bars back home in Messina, it was the song that was listed, but it was not that song when you played it, and it got us almost every time.
It was Nickelback, right? The actual song.
Yeah, it was Nickelback in there. So it was a different Canadian band.
Next is I'd Do Anything for Love, but I won't do that. Meatloaf. Not my favorite Meatloaf, but it's probably the most recognizable one. And then finally, my choice for 1993 is Good by Better Than Ezra.
Oh, yes.
Off of, I believe it was their debut, Deluxe. Or Deluxe might have been their second album.
Deluxe was their second. They're better than I think it was self-titled. It had the Billboard, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got a chance to see Better Than Ezra live back in 2018 out in San Diego, and it was the 25th anniversary of that album, and that the live performance was amazing. Good, that actually whole album's great. Good, Porcelain, Rosalia, Heaven, such a great album. But Good is my choice. I love it. That's now officially slap the table on it. It's my favorite song of 1993 until tomorrow.
My favorite Better Than Ezra song is actually A Lifetime, and I don't think anybody really knows that song outside of Smallville. But if you don't know that track, definitely check it out. They're one of my favorite bands. I love them.
It's amazing. A Lifetime's amazing.
Yes, that's an interesting one. That was also on my short list, but I'm going to delete it now. And touche to you, my friend, Gregory.
It wasn't on my short list. I was just talking to Joe about this shortly before we got on because he was doing final touches on his list to then come on and do final touches on it. But I feel like I'm in a better position right now for the short list than you guys because I started with the longer short list. So I'm still like long short list, but you guys have caught up, or in this year, Dan, you've surpassed me. So like I don't have Linger from the Cranberries on there. Like it's a great song, but it didn't make my short list because if I think Cranberries, Zombie is the song I go to first. So that's like, and that might be the best Sheryl Crow song, but unfortunately that stupid one she did with Kid Rock in my mind has tainted Sheryl Crow. So even though like this is the best Sheryl Crow, like that's where my mind goes. And unfortunately, and not even a valid thing, but like that song didn't make my short list for that reason. So my rule is basically, is this a song I think about without having to see the name of the song or hear the song? So that's how I do it, with one exception on here, just because I love the band and I love a band that does a great cover of it. But so my short list: Asshole, Dennis Leary. Not a song I listened to as a kid, but another of the bars in Messina, one of our friends who was a bartender, it was one of his favorite songs to play. So I think of that song and that man Joe very fondly. And then the song that is like when I hear it, I enjoy it, but I don't think about it, is Precision Auto by Superchunk. And then Jimmy Eat World did a great cover of it years later.
Yes.
But I just respect Superchunk because I think they're great musically, if underrated. But the fact that then they created Merge Records and focused on that while trying to do a career, and the amount of artists that have gone through Merge Records is phenomenal. But
this is now 2 years in a row they made your list too, right?
Yeah, I think 2 of 3.
Yeah.
So, and they were the first year, I think I Talk debuts may have been 89, and that was their debut album too, although nothing really off that. But yeah, Superchunk's going to be a regular through there just because I love them. And even though like in the greater significance, they don't stand up musically like these others, I think what they've done behind the scenes with the record label. But then when we get to the Clueless soundtrack, they're featured on there too. So, but Holler If You Hear Me, Keep Your Head Up from Tupac. Another one that this I think is the second Tupac album, and it's just so much better than the first. All That She Wants, Turn Around, and The Sign, Ace of Base, which the first release, I think, which was like February of that year, only had All That She Wants, and then all 3 of them were on the later one. But all 3 songs, we had that on cassette as kids, and we wore that out. I shot the Sheriff cover too, just love. Creep, Radiohead. It's just, I'm not a big Radiohead guy. I understand why people like them, but they're just not for me. But Creep. And it's hard to screw up a Creep cover too, if you think about it. I mean, Creep's so good, but like chorus of kids singing it changes it. Superstore, the character Sandra plays it on her ukulele, and I know ukulele covers of Creep are popular.
Yeah.
But like she did it twice in the series, once in the context of they thought a character was dead and it was in mourning, and then she did it at her wedding, and like it was a song of celebration between her and her husband too. So
rest in peace to that show. Such a great show.
Creep is a great song, and AOL Instant Message, like that used to be a regular go-to of mine. And a friend would one time sent me a text asking what's wrong when I put it up, because she thought like if you put Creep, something has to be wrong. And I mocked her for it because I'm like, songs don't have to have meaning. But yes, most of the time when we put up lyrics in an away message, we meant something. It was aimed at someone or a situation. But when it was Creep, it wasn't. It's just such a great song.
It's like the early version of subtweeting.
Yeah, it really is. That's why everyone on Twitter is snarky, because of AOL Instant Messenger away messages. If it was in your profile, it was a coin flip whether or not there was some subtext to it. But away messages, I feel like 90% of the time, there are some subtext, even if your subtext is I'm an asshole. So, yeah, Hip Hop Hooray, Public Enemy, which is a great song. LL Cool J had an album out that year, and you guys will be shocked to know not one of those songs is in contention, but 14 Tops to the Dome, great album. From this in particular, Backseat of My Jeep, just a fucking classic. I love that. How I'm Coming, great. And then Pink Cookies in a Plastic Bag Being Crushed by Buildings is the greatest song title of all time. Those are the 3 off that album that always stand out to me. Great album. I don't think there's a bad LL Cool J album, which some people would argue against me, but I love LL, but none of those songs are in contention for Song of the Year for me. But
I think Brand New has something to say about best song titles as well,
though. It probably won't be the first time I say something's the best song title, but since that's a mouthful in what he's going for, it's just, and he name checks 30 other rappers in that song too, so it's just insane. Crying, Crazy, and Amazing off that Aerosmith that album that year, and that was the Alicia Silverstone video era. And who didn't have a crush on Alicia Silverstone? Like, what a run for her! Aerosmith videos making them more relevant even than Run DMC did, then Clueless, and then Batgirl. Like, good for you, Alicia. And then That's the Way Love Goes, and Again by Janet Jackson. I think Again is one of the most beautiful and understated R&B songs. I know Brian McKnight in the duet he did that year, and Trace Tonys were mentioned by a lot of people in these short lists. But the 93 R&B tracks all kind of blend together in my mind. They're all good, but nothing really stands out. But those two tracks off the Janet, and especially Again, I hear Again and I'm just like, damn, Miss Jackson, you can sing. And I think part of the problem is I know a lot of people had I Will Always Love You in this, and it was released as a single. As Joe had told us before we started recording, it was the number one, like the Bodyguard soundtrack was the number one album of the year. But I mean, the song, we all talked about it in 92 when it was like released as the soundtrack. But it is hard for anyone to be in the shadow of that song, I think, for the next couple years. And then we're starting to see the emergence of Mariah. So I think when I listen back to the other R&B tracks of that year, I'm just like, it's Janet. It's got to be Janet. But again, just so beautiful. Insane in the Brain, which Joe mentioned. Whoop, There It Is, which has been mentioned. Cherub Rock is my favorite album, but you can argue Siamese Dream is the best Smashing Pumpkins album. I know that's opinion a lot of people have, and I can't argue against it. I'd have to really think about it to decide one, but I mean, you could probably even have a third one off that album, Dan, that's yours, and none of us are wrong.
Yeah.
We also wouldn't have been wrong making any of them the song of the year. Mr. Jones, Counting Crow, Joe's right, it's the best one off the album. I Do Anything for Love, but I won't do that, was going to be my song of the year. We joked about it. I joked about it. But I really thought about it, and I prefer Bat Out of Hell versus Bat Out of Hell 2 as an album. And I thought, okay, I can't pick the best off an album that's essentially named the same of a lesser album. Like, it just didn't work for me. Heart-Shaped Box, Rape Me by Nirvana, but my favorite Nirvana song off that album is All Apologies. But I think those might be 3 of my 5 favorite Nirvana songs, so that aren't covers on the Unplugged, which is going to be talked about here very shortly. I'm the Only One, Melissa Etheridge. I mean, we're going to get more into that here in a second. Bedrock Anthem, Weird Al. This was an okay Weird Al album, but I think Bedrock Anthem's the best in that. I think when he combines 2 songs to make an original is usually some of his best work, with the exception of Amish Paradise. But Bedrock Anthem's just great. The video was great. But What a Man, Shoop, Salt and Pepper. Boys in the Hood, Eazy-E, which I just love, was written by Ice Cube. I just love that, even though like NWA has splintered at that point, Ice Cube wrote probably the biggest Eazy-E track.
Yep.
Crash Test Dummies. Like When I Fall in Love, Celine Dion. Just what a voice on Miss Dion. As I mentioned earlier, the Wu-Tang album, but so like Cream and Protecting Your Neck, I think, are the best 2 tracks off that album. There's a reason Cream is still getting heavy play on stations. Tribe had a really good album. I know De La Soul had an album that year too, but there just nothing hits me off that De La Soul album. But a War Tour and Oh My God off that Tribe album with Oh My God featuring Busta.
Yeah.
Then Snoop, Gin and Juice, Doggy Dog World, which I think I love more because I think about that video more than any other Snoop Dogg video. And then Murder Was the Case. Definitely far from the best Snoop song, but the relevance in his life and the fact that he was on murder trial, it makes it. But my song of the year is Come to My Window, Melissa Etheridge. It could have been either one of those, but when I realized that was the Melissa Etheridge year, I mean, I think music is different without Melissa Etheridge. Maybe someone else would come on, and we'd talked 4 Non-Blondes already. Tracy Chapman's Fast Cars is probably more relevant at this time than when it came out in the 80s. But I think that like that alternative vibe that Melissa Etheridge brought, and I think she did it with more success than some of her contemporaries. And just we have Lilith there. So I think without Melissa Etheridge, music sounds different now. So like the cultural relevance of that, and also what a fucking song, and what a music video too. I think we're from probably right about now to the early 2000s is like the run of MTV before it completely changes. And that video was all over MTV, much like the Aerosmith videos. I don't think I like Aerosmith nearly as much without those videos. So like the importance of videos can't be understated, but that video from Etheridge was simple, but drove home the song, which I think is sometimes underrated, especially as we get later MTV where the media videos became like high budget affairs. But I thought that video was a simple art form, similar to how the Beastie Boys videos were simple art forms in what they were doing. So just what a song, what a woman. There's no doubt in my mind she's not coming out of the 90s for the song of the decade, but I just had to spotlight it for song of the year, which I think other than Whitney has been really the first woman I've had in contention, which kind of says something about me, I guess, but it's just a phenomenal song.
Fun fact, Melissa Etheridge was my first concert.
Does it say something about you, or does it say something about the state of music?
I think it might say something about the state of music, because we've definitely discussed female artists we love on this. And Sophie B. Hawkins, I guess, was almost my song of the year. Yeah, it says something. And I think that's why it's so important, because, and I think music videos help this a lot too, like being able to see the artists. But I think we're heading into more of the women. I mean, we're about to hit the Mariah run where Mariah crushes it. So
yeah, I gotta say at least half my list that I've gone through, I think, is all women artists. So
well, and I think there's a couple of points there too to be made, right? Because like I think for a lot of it, if you were a female artist, it was expected that you were going to be pop music, right? Like you were going to be in the Paula Abdul vein. You know, there wasn't a lot of room for rockers or rappers. You know, like there's a reason female rappers now are so like highly touted, because even now it's hard for women to get into the rap scene. Rock, there's still not a lot of female-led rock bands, which is why I went through and actually made an all-women's rock playlist on Spotify to highlight some of that. So I don't know if it necessarily says something about you, because I went through every album. I did end up having time to go through every album released that year. Mm-hmm. And granted, there's some on here, right? Like Ace of Base, Melissa Etheridge, Salt and Peppa in the hip hop game. Shania Twain, we mentioned. Liz Phair's debut album was this year.
Well, you mentioned hip hop. Like Queen Latifah had an album that year. I think that was MC Lyte, one of her earlier ones, if not her debut album. And I don't think either album has anything that hits me, but I think that's also, I remember maybe 3 Queen Latifah videos on MTV my whole life. So they weren't something that were relevant. So they wouldn't make my short list just because they're not something I go to often, even though I know Queen Latifah and MC Lyte can rap their asses off. So
Queen Latifah made my top 10 for this year, actually.
That's awesome. Good. And she should. Unfortunately, this wasn't an album I ever really listened to growing up. So like in a year that's so much nostalgia for me, it's hard to crack. And yeah, that probably does say something about the fact that MTV, I could watch Tupac and I could watch Snoop, but Queen Latifah, I had to watch the hip hop specific shows to get Queen Latifah. So
I actually quickly point to Gregory says he's better at narrowing down songs for each year, but he had just as many artists and twice as many songs as I mentioned.
Yeah,
because every single artist is 2 to 3 songs. He's not better at this. He's just cheating.
Well, you pick one song off an album, and I think if an album has multiple songs that are worth merit, you should mention them. So
whatever helps you sleep better at night, Greg, it's okay. So I took the time, I crossed off pretty much everything that was said multiple times. I will say Standing Outside the Fire, Garth Brooks, I think that was a notable song that year. Off the Tuesday Night Music Club album with Sheryl Crow, Leaving Las Vegas and Strong Enough weren't mentioned. I mean, Strong Enough's like, it's still a breakup song for a lot of women. That Counting Crows August and Everything After album had so many hits. You know, you had Annam Begins, you had Omaha, you had The Rain King and Mr. Jones, all that stuff. But after seeing him in concert on 9/11 with Matchbox 20, he was just a giant dickhead about what 9/11 was. Like, just, I at one point he was booed. Like, he was just an asshole. And so for that, I skip Counting Crows every time they come on anything I'm listening to. Mainly just because he put on a really shitty show, and at one point he was just sitting there looking at the crowd, and then he needed Rob Thomas to come in and actually make music relevant there. It was just, I went from being excited to see one of my top 5 bands to being like, I'll never pay money to see them again. That will skip every song I ever hear from them again.
That's really interesting, because I had a student once that went to see Counting Crows while I had them in my class, and they said the opposite about at least the showmanship. They said it was actually a very good performance, that they put on a great show.
That's what I had heard.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I was super bummed out.
I wonder, now there's no defending the 9/11 comments, but I wonder if it's a night by night thing, because I've seen Spoon a handful of times now, and I think Britt Daniels is one of the best on-stage performers ever. He just has a presence. He moves. He knows his cues. Granted, Spoon's been together with the same lineup since the 90s, so like they've been doing it a lot. But so I've seen, every time I've seen them, they've knocked it out the park. But one of the times I saw them in Pittsburgh, they did 2 nights in New York City just before that, and he said on stage that they were both terrible, like they were bad crowds. So I think bad crowds can happen, slumps can happen. So like there can be great artists that obviously have off nights for 100 different reasons, but the mocking 9/11, like getting booed for that, like that, there's no defense. So,
you know, I didn't even care about that so much. It's just, that's what stuck out to me because the performance was so bad. So that's the only thing I remembered. Besides him forgetting the lyrics, like 2 of the songs too. How do you forget the lyrics to Colorblind? You know, like when that's what a lot of people were there to see, you know, so it's just, it was awful all around. But I get they have off nights. I'll just never see him again. Are You Gonna Go My Way? Lenny Kravitz, one of my favorite guitar riffs. And he's also one of my favorite artists besides his shit off the later years. But
I like Lenny, but he's not my favorite person in his own family. So
no, I gotcha. We got Boom Shake the Room, Jazzy Jeff, Fresh Prince, Can't Help Falling in Love, UB40, Cantaloupe Flip Fantasia by US3, and anytime I hear that song, I get in the best mood in the world. I fucking love that track. If I Wanted To, Melissa Etheridge was my favorite song off the Yes I Am album. Such a great track. I blast it every time I hear it. Come Undone, Duran Duran was said. I forgot to delete that. Disarm and Today off of Siamese Dream, just classics for me. I think Billy's voice is just really perfect on those tracks. I know his voice isn't for everybody, but it's, to me, it's really great on those.
On a Billy Corgan tangent, I don't know how aware you two are of this, but like he now owns the NWA Wrestling Federation.
Yep.
So he's done a lot of wrestling podcasts in the last couple of years, and apparently he's a brilliant wrestling mind from what I hear from indie wrestlers and stuff. But one of the stipulations he has about these wrestling podcasts is he doesn't talk Smashing Pumpkins.
Interesting.
Does he talk Zwan? Because they're better than Smashing Pumpkins.
He doesn't talk Zwan, unfortunately. But yeah, no, that's usually one of his rules is he doesn't talk Smashing Pumpkins. And his thing is, I'm here to focus on this. I'm trying to get this off the ground.
Makes sense.
So I kind of understand it, but also since Billy Corgan has a reputation, mostly justifiable, of being an egomaniac, I always find that hilarious. But on the Ringers Wrestling podcast, David Shoemaker, who I absolutely love, said, I know we agreed, no Smashing Pumpkins, but I need to tell you, I really like this album. And since he started it with like apologizing and a compliment, Corgan was willing to talk about. So
he's a very fickle individual. So I had, Mariah, Dream, Lover, Hero. I had Dreams and Linger. I just can't let it go without saying how much of a haunting, beautiful voice Dolores had. Just so great. Hip Hop Parade, Naughty by Nature. I Can't Wake Up, KRS-One. I Get Around, Tupac. Singles I liked, albums I wasn't too big of a fan of, to be honest, at the time. If That's Your Boyfriend, He Wasn't Last Night, Michelle and Degayocello, which I love that track. It was very stylistic. It was very artsy to the point. I wish that track was more prevalent now because I think a lot of people would actually be helped by that. Really powerful track. Laid by James, which was later covered by Matt Nathanson. Just a fun track. I like to hear that at the bar. Love Is by Vanessa Williams, Brad McKnight was already said. Low by Cracker. Please Forgive Me from Bryan Adams. She Don't Use Jelly from the Flaming Lips.
The Ben Folds cover is so much better than the original Flaming Lips. So
I kind of like when Ben Folds covers anything, to be honest. So
agreed.
You're not wrong.
When Across Salt and Pep Off, that was already said. Soul to Squeeze was already said. Stutter by Elastica, such a great track. Selena said Rhythm of the Night, Corona, the Thanksgiving song by Adam Sandler. One song that I've watched the video for at least 10 times this week now is Three Little Pigs by Green Jelly. I absolutely love that album and that song. We had Weird Al and stuff like that. They were more of a hard rock, let's make fun of shit band, and I just loved it. Weak by SWV, Wild One, Faith Hill, the entire 36 Chambers album from Wu-Tang. But Bring the Ruckus is usually the one that I kind of go with. Candlebox's self-titled album, which I love. It's a masterpiece. It had You, Don't You, Far Behind on it. Now we get to my list where I have yet to make a decision, but I'm going to run down my top. I think it ended up with 13. Starts with, again, from Janet Jackson. Not only is it one of my favorite songs of all time, it's my favorite Janet song, but it's also from my favorite movie of all time, which is Poetic Justice. So a lot to it there. Tevin Campbell, Can We Talk? Unity, Queen Latifah. I love that track. I have my students listen to that track as a lesson. Timeless to me. You by Candlebox, Babyface, When Can I See You? Streets of Philadelphia, Bruce Springsteen, Ordinary World, Duran Duran, Fade Into You, Mazzy Star, Another Night, Real McCoy, Breathe Again by Tony Braxton, which is just such a beautiful song. It Was a Good Day, Ice Cube, Keep Your Head Up, Tupac. And in looking at this, I automatically narrow it down to Again by Janet and Fade Into You by Mazzy Star. And both those tracks are one I'm still sitting here listening to today. But I think I actually have to go with Fade Into You by Mazzy Star. It's not only a timeless song, but there's so many layers to it, so many levels to it, and it can be used in so many different moods and so many different ways of healing. I've heard a lot of people just talk about therapeutic the song is for them. Even people, I think we saw in the comments, people just heard that song in the last year and they're like, wow, I'm blown away. And it's a very little known song. I think all these songs are in my top 20 like of all time, which is hard to believe, but it's crazy. But I think I got to go Fade Into You, Mazzy Star. I'm on the spot. I wasn't able to figure it out, but it was between that and Janet, and I'm going to go Mazzy.
Well, and I feel like with Mazzy Star, I never got into them, but so many artists I love now cite Mazzy Star as like an early influence and stuff. So I don't think you can go wrong. I love that you mentioned Babyface as one of your tops. Just going through some of the albums, the number of tracks he has writing credits on in 93 alone is insane. The Mariah album that year, he had writing credits on, I think, 90% of those tracks. So Babyface, like, I'm glad you mentioned him as an artist, because in my mind, he's always a songwriter because, well, he is such a prolific songwriter.
It's just somebody who's never got the love he deserves, whether it's, for the writing or the singing. He's on, like when we just look at album notes, on the back cover and everything, he's on so many of them from so many songs we liked, regardless of genre. I mean, he even wrote country tracks and stuff. He's just, I don't think he's ever got the love he deserves.
Well, you'll hear stories, especially from like the mid 90s, of like a song not working right, and then Babyface gave a note, and then it became a hit song. So you don't get songwriting credits for giving a note.
He was Pharrell before Pharrell was Pharrell, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was a tough one for me. I mean, I just, even when I have to look between like Ordinary World, Janet, Mazzy Star, the hip hop I loved, Ice Cube. I quote that, Jesus, like twice a week online and stuff. It's just what I did with these songs. I went back and I listened to each one today before we did this, and I just, whichever one stuck with me the most, I was like, that's when I got to pick. And to be honest, I hear that song by Mazzy and it sticks with me for like 2 weeks at a time. So it's so haunting and beautiful, and just there's so much to it, and with so few words. So that's mine. 93 was a tough one.
Yeah, that sucked. I'm glad you mentioned Adam Sandler, because I meant to bring him up when we talked about debut albums, because that was his debut album. It's not generally, his recorded stuff isn't for me, but I can remember in like junior high us playing Lunch Lady Land.
Yeah.
And finding that so funny.
And
listen to it back, it's not good, but
if you're in the right spot.
It wasn't on that album, but I can remember listening to the Goat song over and over again.
Yep.
I'm not even sure which album that came from, but I'm glad you mentioned, because I meant to bring them up during debut albums.
And I always forget about this debut album, because when you like look, it always ends up in that stand-up, whereas like Weird Al ends up with music. Sandler ends up with stand-up, even though it's mostly musical. So if not entirely musical for the Sandler albums. So yeah, it's always an interesting distinction, which I think if we were to start doing stand-up albums and specials of the year, we'd be completely different. But yeah, no, Sandler, and I think upcoming later, Stephen Lynch would fall into that. Like technically stand-ups, but yeah, no, they're straight up musical artists. So
yeah.
Bo Burnham, although Bo Burnham now actually does more stand-up in his things than music, but
I never got into Bo Burnham, and I have a grudge against him.
We'll talk about that because I will bring him up when we get to his time. So we'll talk about your grudge then.
I kind of only mentioned Sandler simply because he had radio play for it, to be honest. It was, I think the album's shit. I'm not a fan. But I thought it was relevant because people on school buses were listening to Thanksgiving song on the way to school.
Well, and Sandler writes songs for junior high boys. Like that's also when I was listening to Sandler. So, so like he writes songs and makes movies for junior high boys. Like, and more power to him, because he's filthy rich and can do whatever he wants at this point. So how often does he get to cast Jennifer Aniston as his co-star and go to some beautiful location to shoot a movie? So he doesn't do Hollywood backlots. He just goes on location because he's Adam Sandler. So
yeah, I mean, he's always just been a fuck it kind of guy. So to sum up 93, though, we have Melissa Etheridge, Come to My Window, Better Than Ezra, Good, and Mazzy Star, Fade Into You. And it only gets tougher from here, guys. I took a sneak peek.
This year was very, very close to Gregory and I picking the same one. I would not have guessed that. I honestly, him and I talked about it before, and I mentioned Gin and Juice as a possibility that I thought he might go with.
It's interesting. The more I listen to that song now, I don't like it nearly as much as I used to. I just don't vibe with it.
Gin and Juice is a great chorus. I don't know like how great it is beyond that, but I just feel like Snoop Dogg does a hell of a hook.
Yeah,
he can do a hell of a line that catches you, but I think is considered one of the greatest rappers of all time because of his longevity. But lyrically, he's not the best.
Yeah,
I think there's a reason he started making up his own words.
Right.
He might be the all-time greatest rap personality. I don't think you can argue too many people over him.
I like the dude. I like his flow. I like his demeanor. I listen to a lot of the stuff now that I liked when I was younger. And like, this just doesn't vibe. I put on that entire album, like expecting like blast on like memory lane. I was like, ugh. I used to listen to this on repeat.
I also kind of expected Tom Petty's Mary Jane's Last Dance to come up.
It might be my least favorite Tom Petty track.
I can't stand it.
Really? I think it's so good. It's one of my favorites.
I think my problem is there, especially in the AOL world, like so many like newbie potheads would put like Last Dance with Mary Jane as their away status. It's just ruined the song with me because I don't think they understood the song.
College actually was ruined all Tom Petty for me, to be honest. I need about 20 more years separated from Tom Petty to get back into liking Tom Petty again.
Interesting. I wonder if I just slightly missed that, because the potheads I knew were more likely to put on Pink Floyd, which goes back even further, but I think that's like a drug staple, right? Like,
I mean, I had a bong named Floyd at one point, so yeah.
And then a lot of them would do jam band stuff, like Mo and Fish are massive with the potheads I know.
And Mo and Fish always will be. But like in my mind, jam bands I have as a different, like I like one Mo song and it's Captain America. And so I don't need to know any other Mo songs. And I just don't like Fish. I only know David Bowie, and it's just David Bowie's name all over again. So jam bands I could get over, and I think it's because like, man, you're listening to Floyd and the Doors because like that's stoner requirement. You're listening to jam bands because that's stoner requirement. And I was always just loving Tom Petty so much. I was so sad that got lumped in with what I felt were stoner requirements, which no offense to anyone who loves those jam bands, like love what you love, but Teenage Gregory teenage Gregory just couldn't get into jam bands because of that. But at the same time, I've seen Jazz Mandolin Project, which is a jam band, multiple times, and I love Jazz Mandolin Project. So I love Medeski and Martin Wood. So
I'm going to make you a Mo playlist that you will not dislike.
I feel the same way about Portugal the Man. I didn't realize that they were just straight up a jam band. Oh, yeah. But seeing them live, they're great. And same thing. A lot of
the thing with Petty for me is he was touring when I was in college, so it was all of a sudden people going to Dairy Lake, CMAC, all that stuff to see him, and so it was just all I heard. Like I was done. There's just certain bands that you hear too much of that maybe you enjoyed before, and then it's just overkill. Especially hearing people drunk singing the wrong words over it and all that shit. So like night in, night out.
I'm so glad I was insulated from that then, because I love pretty much everything Tom Petty, and that song specifically, especially the video. The video is so different and weird, I feel like, and it's always just stuck with me. And I just knew that Gregory was also a pretty big fan of Tom Petty.
Yeah, so and I love Petty.
That one would come up.
And oddly enough, I saw Petty in Darien Lake with the Allman Brothers. So like I was in one of those shows that Dan was talking about, and there were a lot of drunks and high folks. And I guess like my problems with Petty being associated with a stoner band should probably be thrown out the window when I saw him with the Allman Brothers. And the Allman Brothers are like the jam band of all jam bands. They played Jessica for like 15 minutes.
I mean, I've been high as hell at those shows too. I just don't want to be around everybody else after the fact listening to this shit. I need about 20 minutes away from all, or 20 years separated from all that. But gentlemen,
I get it.
We wrapped another year.
That was a tough one. That was a doozy.
Before we close here, anything you're plugging this week?
Yeah, for Joe, you go first. I've got plugs.
I don't have much other than Amanda is going to start looking at the YouTube channel and sprucing it up starting tomorrow.
Nice.
So hopefully by the time we record next week and this next week's gets pushed out, everyone will be able to go to the actual channel page and check out what's going on there. See if you dig it. And then if you do, hit up my girl. Give her some work.
What's her website again?
AmandaIrwin.com.
There we go. Gregory, my friend.
So No Coast Defenders, which dropped on Spotify this morning. It dropped on the Podbean last night, but I didn't load it on the Spotify till this morning. But it's up on Spotify now. I am working on revamping my YouTube page. So No Coast Defenders will be there. And I will be starting, much like yourself, Dan, a series of interviews with folks. And it'll just be what they enjoy. I'm more and more adopting a philosophy when I was helped by our guest last night on No Coast Defenders, Jason of the Dumb Marks podcast, but of just enjoying things. And so I want to where your interviews have been tackling a lot of meaningful social issues, and that's important. I just want to talk to people about the shit they like. So whether it's, I'm not a video game person, but Donald of the Dumb Marks podcast, he's really excited about the Resident Evil coming out. Like if Donald wants to talk to me for 20 minutes about Resident Evil, I want to hear Donald's passion about Resident Evil. So it's not going to be necessarily things I like. You guys can get enough of that at substack.com/coolpoints or Cool Points newsletter on Facebook. I want to know what you guys are talking about. I want to hear that. I want your passions. So that's going to be something. It won't be weekly. It might not be bi-weekly, but it's going to be something I'm going to do. I have friends who are passionate about so much. I want to hear what they're passionate about. So that'll be there eventually. And all the No Coast Defenders podcasts. So you guys can see my superhero shirt of the week, because I do that. I've given up music because as we are in the 90s, the most of my band t-shirts are for the late 90s to now. So I was like, man, I'm burning through these long before we get to the artists. So I'm going generic t-shirts, but we will get back into band merch soon, hopefully. And I have more and more albums and CDs and maybe even a couple cassette tapes coming up for visual props here. So yeah, and I mentioned two of the guys from it, but Dumb Marks podcast, Dan and I have formed a friendly relationship with them here on the internet. So go check those guys out. They're live every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern on Dumb Marks YouTube channel. So Jason and Donald are two friends who I just absolutely love. So listen to them.
Beautiful. And as you know, we have our Battle of the Ballads here next week. But then I also want to give a shout out to my buddy Gary here in the area. If you have a chance, you're into comic books and comic stuff, check out Gary B, the Casual Comic Guy on YouTube. He has an initiative for YouTube channels called Grow Together, where it's basically we help each other get subscribers, viewers. We lead people to content they're interested in. And to be honest, he's just an all-around good guy. I shouted him out on the podcast yesterday. Can't say enough. He's helped a lot of YouTube channels get some traction and some attention, link some cool people up together. And it's pretty awesome. So check him out on YouTube. Keep following us. We're going to keep throwing it up there, asking for your recommendations, talking about it. Charlene, I know that you're delighted that Meatloaf got some shout outs today. And just keep following along with us. This is an amazing journey. It's been a blast. Who knew you can go an hour talking about 1 year of music? And to be honest, there's a couple of years we get to where it's going to be quite interesting. And we have a few episodes where we have some guest hosts here to talk with us, which will be exciting. And thank you for following with all this. Our viewership has gone up. And yeah.
Next week with Tony talking on 94 and the causes he's raising money for, I think, are just beyond relevant because we will probably be talking at length about the death of Kurt Cobain next week. And that Unplugged album basically being like his eulogy to himself, I think. So I don't know how you guys feel, but I'm not going to put anything from that album on my short list because that album we just should talk about separately. Nirvana's been all over our short list since 90, so 91 basically, but like 89 got mentioned. So I think just that album, especially Tony's cause raising the money. I think Unplugged next week, we just can talk about that album as a whole separately from our lists.
Yeah, I didn't think any song was really going to make my list. To be singled out, that's one project to me. I've never been able to separate like a single track from that. It's always been a project to me. So to pick one would be to shit on the rest, and I can't do that.
And that's right. I think Joe mentioned the fact that they played the first few bars of Rape Me, and MTV got really mad that they didn't play Smells Like Teen Spirit on this set. But one of the agreements for Kurt Cobain was that he was going to play what he wanted to play. And I mean, they brought friends out. He played folk covers. So like it was very much Kurt Cobain's love letter to music. So I think just talking about that for a few minutes, just separately of the list with Tony next week will be wonderful.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I'm really excited about that. He's contributed to our list so much moving forward. He's really pumped about it. He's got some great causes to talk about that I'm not going to spoil on him. And stay tuned. We'll see you next week. I'll be posting a request probably on Thursday asking for song recommendations. It's fun to see everybody get excited about this and to message me and all that stuff. Also, don't forget to comment in our section here. Shit on us if you don't like our decisions. Say we should have included something. That's what it's all about. So comment. Let us know your thoughts.
I think everyone's going to tell me how good my choice was.
I think they will too, and they'll say how shitty mine was, and I'm fine with that.
Also, go back and watch the interview Dan did with me. I mean, I'm falling behind. Granted, the two things I've fallen behind are videos I've featured in, but watch my video.
Get out of here.
All right, gentlemen, I appreciate you. Thank you, and I will see you next week.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Until next time.